slavery on St. Helena was brought in with the first settlers, so it's been here since the English came in 1659. They actually brought some slaves with them on their first voyage.
This anniversary commemorates when slavery was first abolished on St. Helena, and it was Sir Hudson Lowe, the governor at the time.
Because of Napoleon's 200 years on St. Helena, we have decided it's fair that we give the English side of the story.
And I think the island was a bit ahead of the times in the world. So then moving on through the next couple of decades, several governors then also introduced more and more measures to effectively, when they were still slaves, but they were beginning to be treated much more like regular people, like employees. Even though they weren't getting paid, they introduced schemes for good behaviour where they would receive a cash sum or a medal or something like that. And then it continued like that up until Sir Hudson Lowe came in when Napoleon was here. And he was a particularly progressive governor, quite liberal-minded, and he actually proposed an idea which had been raised previously, but several councillors at the time had opposed this. But he introduced this again, where all children born of slaves would be born free. So what that meant was that over time, all children would eventually be born free, and slavery would have gradually been phased out, as no new slaves could be brought in, and no children would be born as slaves. So this was quite, again, it's quite forward-thinking and quite unique in the British Empire. It hadn't happened anywhere else. So I like to think, St. Helena was a bit ahead of the time there. And then this continued up until 1834, and then governors, under pressure from the company, actually brought in more and more measures to eliminate slavery. So they effectively acquired loans and gave these to the slaves to pay off their own freedom. Unfortunately, the slaves then had to absorb the cost of the loans, which was impossible to pay for them. They didn't have any employment or anything anymore, so it was quite difficult to pay off the loans, and eventually these loans were written off. But ultimately, the slaves were free.
December 200 years ago, on Christmas Day, marks a very important period, a very important date in our history as a people, because on Christmas Day 1818, Sir Hudson Lowe decreed that all children born of slaves should be born free. Slavery has been part of our society, part of our community right from the outset. When the English at the time settled the uninhabited island in 1659, they brought their own settlers, they brought the garrison to defend the place, and they picked up a few slaves from Cape Verde Islands. But St. Helena's role was a key staging post for the East India Company trading with the Far East. So our slaves, many if not most of our slaves, were brought connected with trade with India, connected with the Indian Ocean and the Indian Ocean rim. So you're talking about Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Madagascar, east coast of Africa. They were picking up slaves on the homeward run, for trade. For most of our history, until slavery was officially abolished in the 1830s, the slave population were the largest group in our community. So within that period, you would have had, because slaves didn't live very longly, you would have had something like five generations, so 5 or 6 generations. So the number of slaves that would have died would have been something in the region of 5,000 or 6,000, something 5,000 or 6,000. There are no there were no recognized slave burial sites for slaves that form part of our community, part of our ancestry. There are only two known gravestones. One is the one that's well known are the two headstones called the Butcher's Graves near to Plantation, and where we're standing now is the other one, and you can see there there's hardly anything left of it. That's all they're left of it. Fortunately, in the 1970s, with a group of secondary school students, we copied every single gravestone on St. Helena. So we have a record. And in order to keep that record, I've recently published a book of poems, and there is a poem in there about Diana, just so we have a record. So perhaps I could just read, not the whole poem, but just the second verse. It's called, the collection is called Call of the Seagull. A slave girl buried on a hill, overlooking a mansion and fields, back broken on a plantation, a broken headstone, a Mount Eternity, a name only, Diana. Slaves, we had a very divisive society when it was during the days of the East India Company, from 1659 when the island was from when the island was settled, up until when the East India Company left in the 1830s. It was about the same time when slavery was abolished. And when the East India Company left, the Crown took over. So it was a very divisive society. You had different laws. You had military law, you had civilian law, and for the slaves, you had different laws. In fact, slaves were never treated as human. They were treated as property. And that is why they would have been they would have been buried, tucked away somewhere, not anywhere prominent. The great thing about us St. Helenians is that in our social history is that after the abolition of slavery in the 1830s on St. Helena, within a few generations we come to be integrated. This very divisive society became integrated with a common identity. To me, that's very special. If you look at what's also special about it, as me, I'm a mixture of all these different races, different groups. Is only the fittest had to survive. So it's a really great gene pool. It really is. And this is another thing about this. I know I'm repeating it. What is special about St. Helena is our transition through slavery took place within a few generations. The transition was in the 1800s. In other places, countries in the world, we had slavery for this length of time. They still are having real problems and are still going through the transition. So this makes St. Helena as another special place.
We use the character of Sir Hudson Lowe, who was the governor during the 5 years that Napoleon was exiled here, and we're doing an exhibition, and it will open in the mid of April, exactly 202 years after Hudson Lowe arrived on the island. So it will cover mostly the civil administration of Hudson Lowe on St. Helena. And because of that, of course, there is some amazing event which he put his signature on the bottom of the page, which is every children born slave on the island will be from now on free. And that will happen from the 25th of December 1818. So on the 25th of December this year, we will have this event commemorated, and of course it will be part of the exhibition, which will, as I said, will only open in April. Therefore, at the museum at Jamestown, they will cover this specific aspect, which will be part of the exhibition. So for this purpose, we have give them some snippets of the exhibition, but to cover this aspect of the story. So from now on the 25th of December 2018, we will have an exhibition showing what Hudson Law involvement into the freeing the slave process, and after that it will be repeated at Plantation House, but through so many other angles. I mean, Hudson Law, because of Napoleon being on St. Helena, has done so much on the island because there were so many people here. The island never been as prosperous economically than when Napoleon was here. So Hudson Law carried out so many projects like redoing the run, like doing the roads and so on, so the fortifications amongst 101 things. So everything will be displayed at Plantation House for the rest of the time of the years of the bicentenary of Napoleon on St. Helena.